Okay, I'll start off with some instructions. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's session from Belém to Canada, ORCIE at COP30, Insights and Future Advocacy Paths. Thank you for joining us. We will have a simultaneous translation into French from English today. Bienvenue à la session d'aujourd'hui de Belém au Canada, le BCREI à la COP30. Perspectives et futures voies de plaidoyer. Merci de vous joindre à nous. Aujourd'hui, nous disposerons d'un service de traduction simultanée en anglais et en français. Quelques précisions sur l'utilisation de l'interprétation. Pour participer à la session d'interprétation, vous devez être connecté via l'audio de l'ordinateur et non par téléphone. Dans la fenêtre Zoom, cherchez l'icône Interprétation, un globe, dans la barre d'outils située vers le bas de la fenêtre. Si vous ne voyez pas l'interprétation dans votre barre d'outils, essayez de cliquer sur le bouton plus pour chercher l'icône Interprétation. Une fois que vous avez cliqué sur le bouton Interprétation, vous devez sélectionner la langue dans laquelle vous souhaitez participer. Choisissez la langue dans laquelle vous voulez parler et écouter. A few details for using interpretation today. You must be joined via computer audio to participate in the interpretation session. Within the Zoom window, look for the interpretation icon, a globe, in the toolbar located at the bottom of the window. If you don't see the interpretation option in your toolbar, try clicking the More button to look for the interpretation icon. Once the interpretation icon is clicked, you'll want to select the language you want to participate in. Choose the language option by which you want to speak and listen in. For your information, today's session will be recorded. Once we get started, participants will be muted throughout. You may use the chat now to say hello to one another. Pour votre information, cette séance sera enregistrée. Une fois que nous aurons commencé, les participants seront mis en sourdine. Vous pouvez utiliser le chat maintenant pour dire un petit bonjour. Over to you, Saskia.
Thanks, Genevieve, for getting us all settled in. And I would like to walk through our agenda for today. So maybe we need to move to the next slide. Great. So, we'll begin with a land acknowledgement from Tara, followed by Darlene, who will open us in prayer. After that, we'll offer a brief introduction to ORCIE for those who may be joining us for the first time. So on your right, our share reflections today will focus on three key areas. Why civil society participation is essential in climate negotiation spaces, the unique moral and ethical leaderships that faith communities brought to COP30, and the upcoming opportunities for collective action through ORCIE's advocacy. Then we'll close the session with a questions and answer, a Q&A. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat box at any point, and we'll address them during the final section. Now I will hand it over to Tara to open our session with a land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Saskia. So I'm joining you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, not too far from the Kichisibi, the Great River, or also known as the Ottawa River. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land that we are each joining from. From coast to coast to coast, these are the unceded and ancestral territories of the Inuit, First Nations, and Métis people. This is an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations, and to our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples, their cultures, and their lands. At COP30, there was an Indigenous-led delegation of thousands of Amazonian land defenders who traveled to Belém to deliver the message that the Great Rainforest is at a tipping point. On this occasion, I'd like to take just a moment of silence for land and water defenders all over the world, but also time to reflect on other historical and current forms of colonial harm, and to consider how we can each, in our own way, move forward in a spirit of cultural humility, truth, decolonization, healing, and collaboration. So we'll just take a few moments now. So if you'd like, you're welcome to put the territories that you are joining from or their treaties on the places that you're joining from. And then I will hand it over to Darlene, I think. Will lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Tara. So just building on Tara's land acknowledgement and grounding ourselves in presence, I want to share this prayer, which is a blessing for presence by John O'Donohue. May you awaken to the mystery of being here and enter the quiet immensity of your own presence. May you have joy and peace in the temple of your senses. May you receive great encouragement when new frontiers beckon. May you respond to the call of your gift and find the courage to follow its path. May the flame of anger free you from falsity. May warmth of heart keep your presence aflame, and anxiety never linger about you. May your outer dignity mirror an inner dignity of soul. May you take time to celebrate the quiet miracles that seek no attention. May you be consoled in the secret symmetry of your soul. May you experience each day as a sacred gift, woven around the heart of wonder. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Darlene, for grounding us so beautifully in prayer and centering our hearts for the reflections ahead. So I will begin by sharing a little bit about who ORCIE is and what we do for those of you who are with us for the first time. ORCIE was established in June 2021 as the Office of Religious Congregations for Integral Ecology, who has enhanced the capacity of over 24 Catholic religious congregations to collaboratively increase their impact on policy change towards social and ecological justice. So what do we actually do here at ORCIE? Where our work spans a whole range of advocacy tools, everything from policy brief and letters to the ministers to policy submissions and loving days. We also support congregations formation. We lead public campaigns and engage in international advocacy. So all of these pieces come together to strengthen our collective voice for climate justice. Great. So before,
as community members,
sorry, I think someone is unmuted. Okay, great. Okay, so before we dive into our reflections from COP30 today, I would love to get a sense of how closely you've been following the conference of COP30 this year. And please don't worry if you haven't been able to keep up. We all have full lives, and that's completely fine. So this is just to help us understand where everybody's coming from, so we can make today's conversation as meaningful as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to open a short poll on your screen, and you can simply choose one of the 4 options displayed. So if we could have, yes, so you'll see on your screen there, the 4 options, pick one that you're more aligned to. So we can take a minute to help you and do that.
Okay, I think it's done now.
Great. Thank you. And I even answer myself too. So maybe Karen, if we'll be able to share the results to see where we're at. Oh my goodness. Okay. So there's some people who have followed very closely, but it seems like we're all basically in the middle. I'm so happy to hear that the one down is 0%. So we all have a little bit of reference. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to close this now. Great. So I'll hand it over to Genevieve then.
Here we go. COP30. The 30th UN Climate Change Conference was recently held in Belém, northwest Brazil, at the mouth of the Amazon River. It was the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, where 195 countries committed to limiting global warming to 1.5%, with the objective of hitting net zero by 2050. I'll start with good news. We are now bending the curve. We are now bending the curve of planet heating emissions downward for the first time, which means less risk for people, less risk for people and ecosystems, while helping shift trillions of dollars from fossil fuels to clean energy. And the Paris Agreement's ultimate success hinges on whether our political leaders and their governments are willing to show courage, the courage needed to close the ambition gap, the courage needed to phase out fossil fuels, to increase financing for a just transition, and also to safeguard the communities who are already experiencing increasing loss and damage. And how will our elected leaders demonstrate courage? They'll demonstrate courage because of us. COP30 was different because of the space that was made for civil society to have a voice and contribute to put pressure on the negotiations. Let me set the scene for you. The Amazon. It was symbolically rich. She is the natural world we want to protect. It's a global commons with incredible biodiversity and a place where there's a real increased recognition of the rights of Indigenous people to the land, and also the real way Indigenous leadership is the answer in climate solutions. Belém also gave us an experience of climate that made global warming feel very real. It was hot. It was really hot and humid. And we had a very active COP presidency in Brazil, high expectations, big ambition. The US wasn't present, but the other countries were very active. And COP30 had some outcomes, which is not insignificant considering the geopolitical context. A lot has been said about the negotiations. In the fossil fuel debate, COP30 struggled to reach consensus on phasing out oil, gas, and coal. The outcome was a watered-down agreement. But there's renewed energy and urgency for civil society pressure and voices from the global south, particularly on equity and finance, with calls for debt cancellation, an increase in climate finance, global financial system reform, and fair share contributions. This here. When meetings like the G7, the G20, or UN conferences are held in the global south, it changes the agenda. When the G7 was in Canada, the focus was on trade and Trump and on artificial intelligence. When the G20 was hosted in South Africa, addressing the debt crisis was put on the agenda. With COP30 in Brazil, there were elevated demands for territorial protection, for land demarcation, and Indigenous stewardship. Alongside COP30 negotiations, there were a number of parallel conferences. The Cúpula dos Povos, the People Summit, notably with groups like MAB, the Movement Against People Affected by Dams, a big people-led social movement in Brazil that was fighting against dangerous dam projects in Brazil and across the Amazon. And MAB is fighting for a people-led energy model for Brazil, working directly with people, the affected populations, and organizes at all levels from local to national. At this parallel conference, there were 30,000 attendees and 1,100 organizations to challenge COP's official agenda and to defend the sovereignty of traditional peoples against the false solutions of the climate crisis. And nobody spoke English. Not a word. It was entirely not only in Portuguese, but Brazilian Portuguese and a dialect of Brazilian Portuguese. And as I took part with the members of religious congregations at the Cúpula dos Povos, it was a real learning moment for me. I really thought Brazil was organizing a parallel COP, but really it was about mobilizing civil society in Latin America and Brazil. And wow, Brazil is truly the capital of social movements. I've never seen anything like it. And the mobilizations in Brazil by Brazilians achieved a number of significant victories. After protests by indigenous peoples at the UN, you can see a little bit in the bottom left photo, on multiple days, the Brazilian federal government announced that there would be no projects carried out on the Tapajós River, the community's river, without prior free and informed consent. And now the MAB movement is something completely new. It's new. It's been created or shifted into the international movement of people affected by dams and the climate crisis to come together to strengthen global resistance in the face of environmental disasters and the climate crisis. Saskia?
Great, thanks, Jen. And the million-dollar question, as Jen mentioned earlier, COP30 really felt like a chirological moment, like kind of right time when the conditions finally aligned for civil society to step back into the center of the conversation. So after three consecutive COPs held in countries where human rights were weak and civil society presence was minimal, for example, COP27 was in Egypt, COP28 in Dubai, and COP29 in Baku, arriving in Brazil was like stepping into a completely different atmosphere. You could sense it at once, and the halls were alive with strong voices. There were youth movements, indigenous leaders on the hallways, researchers, health workers, faith communities. So everybody was present, everybody was visible and determined to be heard. And what's neat about is that what they brought wasn't just information, as the official negotiations did, but it was beyond that lived experience. There were moral perspectives and refusal to settle for false solutions that we already heard about. So for us at ORCIE, where the values guiding our work are rooted in integral ecology, this was such a powerful reminder that climate justice simply cannot happen without broad social participation. And in Belém, that became real because you can see it in the energy, the diversity of people, the courage of people showing up exactly at the right moment. So more concretely, let me walk you through what actually looked like on the ground where Jen and I were. So ORCIE was a COP, like other civil society organizations, to put pressure on negotiations by demanding climate finance ambition, fossil fuel accountability, and a just transition. So as you see in the pictures, the civil society really pushed hard. Organizations like Climate Action Network, CANRAC, and its partners, including ORCIE, expressed that we cannot leave COP without securing the next step on the just transition. So we brought forward the Belém Action Mechanism. And what is that? That's a new global architecture that civil society designed to coordinate global efforts, share best practices, and mobilize resources to ensure a just transition for workers, communities, and indigenous peoples. As you can see in the bottom, the picture in the bottom, that's actually right on the hallway where official negotiations were taking place, and civil society was right there. So now here's something important we saw, is that Canada remained silent in the conversation. We saw the G7 plus China and the European Union and other countries proposing ways forward for the Just Transition Work Program. But Canada just offered sympathetic nods to domestic sustainable jobs, but not substantive commitments to the mechanism that could link global cooperation, justice, and climate action. So to illustrate this more concretely, I want to show you a short video that captures some of this energy and momentum ORCIE brought into the space. So here's Jen speaking to Minister Julie Dabrusin at COP, Minister of Environment in Canada, and to the Canadian negotiators. They were putting pressure on Canada to step up on the Belém action mechanism.
The Just Transition Work Program, and as we know, that's had a lot of challenges. It's really stuck, I would say, in dialogue and sharing best practices for what works in the north, but not necessarily addressing the structural issues and a way forward that would work for folks in the global south. So I'd like to see how Canada can step up in a way we'd like to be the leader, the builder, the multilateral, about the Just Transition Work, and specifically when we have the Berlin Action Mechanism, which we're learning with Group of 77 and other countries are really keen to move forward, how Canada can step up and contribute in that way.
Great. So if you want to see the video again, you can go to
look at what is
YouTube
happening
channel.
between Washington and Ottawa right now. It does not look like diplomacy. It looks like a break.
We had another guest. Great. So I guess this is good news, and one of the wins that we're happy to share about what happened in COP30. So the outcome of this pressure by civil society is basically that we won. I mean, that's the important thing to highlight. The BAM, the Belém Action Mechanism, was accepted at COP30, and it was a huge win civil society can rejoice in. It has the most progressive right-based framing ever seen in a COP decision, and that includes human rights and labor rights, rights to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, free, prior, and informed consent for indigenous peoples, and recognition of marginalized groups, including women, youth, disabled people, and people of African descent. But of course, there is more work to be done. So although that was a win, and while the mechanism was agreed upon at COP, it won't be fully established immediately, and most importantly, it needs a budget. So advocacy is needed here towards the next COP in this regards. Now, getting a little bit into another issue in the negotiations on finance for adaptation, civil society called for ambitious adaptation package. The call was concrete. It was at least 120 billion per year by 2030 on financing from developed countries to developing countries in the form of grants, obviously to avoid burdening developing nations with further debt. So civil society also called for equity in implementation in terms of adaptation, and for clear, very importantly, indicators to measure how finance, technology transfer, and capacity building will move from developed to developing countries in line with the Paris Agreement. So there was a call for COP30 to deliver an adaptation finance commitment that is not only big in quantity, but strong in quality. So communities deserve more than numbers. They deserve support that they can actually use. And although, as you can see there, I think if we move back to the slide, the figure was agreed for actually the year 2035. So it was agreed in figure and date, but obviously the question now remains how the money will be used and what the indicators are. So that's some food for advocacy after that. Thanks. And while the adaptation finance was a major focus, there was also another area where momentum grew in a positive direction, and that was around the global push to phase out fossil fuels. ORCIE is part of a rapidly expanding international movement towards a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. So in response to the work with the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, Colombia and the Netherlands were two countries that announced the first international conference for the phase out of fossil fuel that is scheduled for April in Santa Marta, Colombia. This conference will come with the participation of government, NGOs, academics, grassroots groups, and it is complementary to the UNFCCC, which is an important thing to highlight. And it will focus on identifying legal, economic, and social pathways that are necessary to phase out fossil fuels. So really, this is an opportunity for us to press for just transition principles, to link debt with climate finance, and to center indigenous and frontline communities at the conversations. So we'll be sharing on the chat the link that was just released about the conference. And you will hear more from us in other faith-based groups who are organizing in April to prepare to support the conference. And the link should be shortly on the chat if you want to explore more.
Thanks. So, integral ecology. One of the most interesting learnings we had was to see how environmental issues were defined very narrowly. It's very clear how important it is to have an integral ecology approach. It's a given for us with our experience with Catholic social teachings and the growing understanding of the interconnectedness with the non-human world. We participated in civil society spaces to question this limited view. For example, bringing in issues of peace, naming the harm of militarism, both on the earth, the people, and the financial cost. How could we be asking Sudan to submit a nationally determined contribution in the middle of a civil war and the extractive plunder of its oil? We really need an integral ecology framework in multilateral forums. How do we do this? In Belém, we saw every day how climate diplomacy is increasingly relational rather than procedural. The real breakthroughs came from the quiet human connections, the in-chance encounters, forming unusual alliances that quietly reorient the field and make future policy breakthroughs possible.
Great. And as you see in the pictures, all of this really came to life in Belém. It's the first time I see my picture there. Okay, great. We were all stuck in one place, really in one moment. And because of that, we also became part of the pressure, that pressure for change. You could feel how much it mattered that faith communities were there, not on the sidelines, but fully at the table. So faith communities sit at the table because faith communities are part of a global whole. We are called not just to be observers, but participants. So the climate agenda reflects real social impacts and not only government or corporate priorities. And well, this is true as well because we carry social weight. If you think about it, billions of voices that cannot be ignored in global climate negotiations, because about 5.8 billion people in the world, that's like 84% of the world population, identify as religious. So if you think about that's a big number, and we carry the voices of a lot of people. So at COP30, for the first time, there was coordinated Catholic presence, bringing Laudato Si framing to issues like finance, loss and damage, and justice demands. Jen actually was asked to advise the Vatican on a number of issues. And we also work closely with the Ecclesial Network Alliance, where the church is being organized and mobilized by biome. This is from the experience of the Synod of the Amazon, and we met with groups from Oceania, Great Lakes region of Africa, and the Amazon. And at the end of COP, civil society, this Catholic network produced a document from Belém, a global synodal voice for ecological conversion, which, by the way, some of you might have signed. We posted on our website. And the document calls from the heart of the Amazon, cardinals, bishops, religious orders, and organizations from around the world united at COP30 to reaffirm their commitment to creation and to those suffering most from the climate crisis. We're shortly gonna share the link on the chat where you can, there it is. Thanks, Karen. Where you can read the statement if you like. Well, that's beautiful pictures. So another exciting thing that groups like ORCIE are bringing to these spaces is the concept of ecological debt, a concept that started to gain real traction while we're there. In ORCIE's presence and reflections at the side event, I'm going to mention the name of the event, is responding to the Global South Catholic Bishop Conference call for climate justice. This helped highlight the prophetic leadership emerging from the Global South. And this was an important moment for us as staff at ORCIE as well, because we were part of the coalition. Personally, in my participation in the panel discussion, I shared my experience as a binational citizen, Honduran Canadian, and I spoke about the climate impacts that climate crisis has in Honduras. It's a crisis that has for many years forced Honduras to rebuild itself over and over again, while at the same time we were carrying a huge public debt. Right now in the year 2025 was about 13 billion US dollars. And I share my experience very personally about having actually been in 3 different hurricanes, been in Honduras. First as a young girl when in 1998, Mitch was a huge hurricane, devastating for the country. I was part of the rescuing groups, and we're doing excavation. In those moments, talking about chirological moments, in those moments when you actually realize, how big this issue is, right? When you actually have to go and like digging soil from people's houses and live it firsthand. And later on, as an adult, being in Canada, I guess from a different position, I also went to Honduras, and right after I left, a week after my trips, 2019, Hurricane Eta and Iota happened consecutively in a matter of months in between. And I saw like family members, friends losing their houses, people rushing to fundraise. And those are the moments that you realize this is real, right? So I got to share that in the table, and it was quite of a moment for me to be able to share that coming as a representative of ORCIE, but also as a representative of the people of Honduras. And lastly, I think as a Canadian too. So I guess I'm a three-person in one, but that was important to be able to share that. And I recall I also shared during the panel how I had the opportunity to speak with sisters of Catholic religious congregations in Honduras this past year, and some of them who are connected obviously with congregations at ORCIE, they're part of that. And interestingly enough, when I spoke to them about the work that ORCIE is doing, sisters in Honduras had this, I guess, a new awareness, because they have been talking about environmental issues within their communities, some of them in their schools, and with parents and kids from the perspective of ecological conversion. Like, yes, we need to be part of the solution. We need to take care of the water. We need to recycle. And there was a sense also of blaming themselves that I found quite shocking, being from Honduras and then being in Canada, working in this work of climate justice. And I asked her, like, so you think it's all the people of Honduras have to do better on this? They're like, yes, absolutely. But then I start to like bring it in the work we're doing in climate justice here in Canada. And then they got really interested, and they're like, well, you know what? This is an aspect that we do need more formation in, not only for us, but also for the communities with the kids that we work. And they're addressed that was an important work that they wanted to be part of. But interestingly enough, it was a new perspective for them as well, right? So to me, that was very revealing, and I got to share that in the panel, because I think this document that the bishops release can not only stay as a document we post on our website, but it has to be like the seed for us in congregations and churches to start brainstorming ways and how we can concretely use the document to address some of the calls that they're suggesting in the document. And one more thing I'm going to add next to me, if you see in the picture, then the left side, maybe on the right side for you, I'm not sure. But next to me was Sister Immaculate Tusingiri. I hope I pronounced her name correctly. I'm pronouncing it in Spanish. She was representing her congregation. She was also part of the panel. They're the Medical Mission Sisters of Uganda, and they're present in 5 different continents. So when Sister Immaculate spoke, I have my ear, because she actually was very clear during the panel to remind us about the Laudato Si call, to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And she did it in a very concrete way. She says the document, through the Laudato Si document, we have grown to understand that healing means more than treating illness. It also is also the nurturing of the whole person, the whole community, and ultimately the ecosystem. We have grown to understand that true healing cannot be separate from the health of the planet. And she reminds us that our mission, reminds us that the ecological justice is really not an option for us. It's an expression of our spirituality and our profound reverence for God's creation. So these are important reminders she brought to the table. So my time there, I close basically expressing how this written document by the Cardinals of the Global South can help inform congregations, parishes, but most importantly, it's calling us to work together, not only us here in the Global North, but work together, Global North with Global South, in a coalition where we can address the messaging of ecological reparations in concrete ways. So ultimately, this is at the heart of the call document. It's really a bold proposal because it involves a lot of work to form this North-South coalition. but it means really building bridges across churches, NGOs, indigenous groups, and international partners. And I guess that is the work ahead that we left after we were at the panel. And the last thing I'm going to close for this section here is at the end of the event, I have the opportunity to connect with a representative from Caritas Latino America, and a couple of them who were interested in partnering with organizations like ORCIE and other organizations that want to explore the possibility of an ecclesial observatory for climate justice, which was called in the document. And we have when we came back to Canada, we held few exploratory calls on this project, and we're really keen on looking for where this might lead. So I'm going to leave you with that about this participation and pass it on to Jen.
Thank you. So one of the most overwhelming parts of our time in Belém was how we experienced a sense of dissonance, a sense of disconnect, and we experienced that almost every day. There was a significant disconnect between what was happening inside the walls of the UN space and the real world outside the space. The disconnect between talking about the environment while blasting air conditioners to deal with the heat, or the never-ending arguments about the wording of a subsection of a document. And one of the most painful disconnections was Canada's silence on almost all of the main issues at COP30. It was deafening, their silence, and it was very disappointing. Our elected leaders were barely there. And when they were, it was to make announcements about policies they'd already promised or were already ongoing on methane and climate finance, but not new climate finance money, old climate finance money. There was also a real denial of how Canada's role internationally has changed. Our leaders are still talking as if Canada is the big peace builder, the environmental leader, and the defender of human rights. Well, we see back home, that's not what's happening.
Great. Well, that's one of our favorite pictures there, the sisters smiling. These are the sisters we stay with in Brazil. And so I don't want you to get tired of my voice now, so we're coming to a close soon with the presentation. But I want to lift up something that became very clear for us at COP30, and is that so much of this work is really about building relationships and trust, which is definitely needed for long-term policy change. And we realized that the tasks that we did help us get things done, but the real openings and really the real shift in momentum for us was from human encounters with the people that we encounter over there, doing the same things that we're trying to do with the same calls and that same urgency. And we did traditional advocacy, petition, letters, communications, all the outcomes we plan to achieve in a setting like an international conference. But really what happened a lot was there was a relational advocacy, which is something different. And it's really that in-person encounters that we witnessed and we're part of, those encounters that disrupted, that softened, or that reoriented the space at the time. We learned that climate diplomacy is increasingly relational. It's not procedural. And for many of us, that came alive really in the very simple moments we experienced while we're there. And that was with the network strengthening that happened as we were part of these coalitions. And we created some unusual alliances, if you can call it that way. And a lot of that happening at, meeting another advocates from all over the world while we're waiting for the buses, or sharing our hopes and challenges, meeting in the lines ups and exchanging business cards with other organizations and some of the Canadian delegates as well. I think those moments build trust. We were all in one space in one moment with a lot of hope for many of us. And that opened a lot of future invitations for ORCIE and for us as a staff in doing our work. And many times, like you saw in the video with Jen speaking to the minister, it also shifted the tone of the conversation. So I think that's what we really take from this experience. And lastly, I think for both Jen and I would like to honor both things, the visible work that we did, but also the invisible shift that happened at COP30. And basically, we realized this because before we went there, we went prepared to do all the official advocacy, the meetings, petition, the statements, the press, and we did them. But the moments that genuinely matters and the ones that we really remember are those human encounters that we want to build upon. So to close up, I included the picture of the Sister of San Joseph of Brazil, some of them, but we were actually with 9 women during our trip, 9 of the sisters from Brazil, and it was one of the sister, Barbara, in the picture there from the United States. And they will send us off every day, before we head to the venue. And they used to tell us, you are our voice in that space. And that's because we're going to the blue zone, which is the official negotiation room. And usually they were going to the green zone, which is not the official space in the UN conference. So for us, those words really was the grounding us, every time we leave for the venue. And it reminded us of who we're caring and why these works matter for us and in general, right? Why the work we do matter. Okay, so I think COP30 had, some of challenges and gaps, of course, but after all that, I think it's important to talk about what's hopeful moving forward. So after that, the advocacy, the encounters, the breakthroughs, the setbacks, it's important to us to name some few of the things that are important for us to carry on. And one thing is that COP might look different in the coming years. As we see the geopolitical situation right now, there might be some coalition of the willing. Those countries like Colombia and Netherlands, they want to get together and still keep the multilateral conversations going. There will be some countries that are going to be pushing back, as we know. And there will also be some countries in between. So we need to work with that. So what I want us to close with is that we need to keep in mind that civil society keeps pushing. And yes, we shoot for the moon and we want, the greatest thing to happen. And it doesn't always work the first time. But we have to remember the needle is still moving. So we also have to remember that the path to justice is quite complex. It's not linear. And we need to take one step forward. We might have to take a step backwards. But the important thing is that we have to remember to keep pushing and pushing again. And yeah, I think, I just have one last thing to say. Basically, I just wanted to close with the reminder about our coalition forming and the importance of us having the courage to keep showing up, even if the outcome is not perfect. So I think we really learned that when we're there. And we learned that hope isn't passive and it's something we need to practice together. So to keep that in mind. Great. So I'll pass it to Genevieve now, who will walk us
Thank
through
you,
the
Saskia.
next steps.
Thanks, Saskia. So while we were in Belém, the ministers rushed back, and all of a sudden, we find out that the Prime Minister Carney has signed a memorandum of understanding with Alberta. How bizarre was that? And here is what ORCIE has been working on since then, the last couple months, and how you can help. So for us, we need to continue to advocate for greater climate ambition. We need to push Canada's federal government to adopt stronger climate targets rather than settling for lower expectations demanded by short-term economic pressures. This is the new thing. Everything is going to be rewritten if we think it will help our economy. And this is not the way forward. As well, we need to be vigilant. Be vigilant that Canada doesn't backtrack or deregulate, that we don't compromise our environmental standards, our climate goals, and the rights of Indigenous people. And this is what we're seeing happen with the projects of national interest and also with the rare earth minerals. Two other things we're following and working on is on climate finance and debt cancellation, and carbon pricing as a priority tool. And here we've been working a bit on industrial carbon pricing. But lastly, we need to continue framing climate policy through the perspective of interconnected environment and social justice concerns to make sure that our climate policies serve the common good and protect our shared future for generations to come. And I'm not going to let you get away without my very clear, simple ask of what you can do today. And this you see in front of you is about the Turn Debt into Hope campaign. You'll remember that there are, or many of you, all of you in your communities have been signing petitions. I think we're up to 70,000 Canadians have signed, 70,000 Canadians have signed the Global Jubilee petition. But what's in front of you, and I'll read it out for you, but it has updated focus calls to action about debt cancellation and climate finance that's specific for the Canadian federal government. And what we're trying to do, this is a more focused advocacy strategy to bring forward parliamentary petitions to be read in the House of Commons between now and April. In April, we're going to deliver the 70,000 signatures. But we needed to have a clear Canadian focus. So these calls you see in front of you are a way to get debt cancellation on the radar of our leaders in the House, creating a drumbeat of attention that our leaders can't ignore. So for this, we need you to meet with MPs locally, to bring in the paper parliamentary petition with 30 signatures, and ask them to submit it and read it in the House, which also requires them to bring back a response from the government. So you'll be receiving an email from Saskia and I with all of the info. It's also on our website, and I think someone will put the info in the chat as well. This is something we're working on in the next couple months, and we invite you to be part of this project of moving the debt cancellation through its last big push for action by our leaders in Canada. Thank you so much for traveling with us from Ottawa to Belém and back. And now I'm going to pass it over to Joe, who will moderate the question and answer session. And I'll see if I can get these captions turned off. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. So those that would like to ask a question can either raise their hands or put the question in the chat. There are no questions in the chat yet, so the floor is open. But Pat, I see you have your hand up.
Can you tell me if it is possible that somebody who signed the petition, let's say for the People's Forum, could re-sign this petition because the advocacy is different than it was, from what I'm understanding Jen to say?
Yes. Thank you for asking that question, Pat, because that's really helpful. So we have 70,000 Canadians who joined the Global Jubilee petition, which is, I think, in 300,000 some. And it was a general petition calling for debt cancellation. This one, you can sign. Anyone who is a resident of Canada can sign it. You sign it and put your postal code. And in this one, we're asking specifically for Canada to initiate a review of all debts held by Canada, and then to cancel and remedy any unjust or unsustainable debts without conditions, to continue advocating for a UN framework in whatever spaces Canada is present. And then third, that when it comes to climate finance, that Canada increase the grants portion and only use grants to address things like adaptation or loss and damage. We want to make sure that loans are less and less used as Canada steps up, this should, on climate finance. So short answer, yes, if you signed the big general one, you can sign this one. This is a more focused piece for the last couple months as we bring our issues forward in Canada.
Thanks for your question, Pat. Luke.
I'm gonna actually
Thanks
close
very much
this.
for the presentation. Nice. As somebody who was there too, it's nice to see this presentation today bring me back to that amazing experience. Saskia, you mentioned that some initial exploratory meetings kind of with people you came into contact with at COP30 about an ecclesial observatory for climate that's mentioned in the document of the bishops of the three continental conferences. And I'm just was curious to hear a little bit more about that. I wanted to, because there is actually, I think, a growing interest and energy, even on the part of our bishops, to do something concrete. So just to share, one of the people who was on the delegation with us at Development and Peace was, we had two bishops, Bishop Jan Hansen and Bishop Martin La Liberté, who are members of the National Council. And I'm not sure if everybody is aware of this, originally they were coming with us as members of Development and Peace, but the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops asked and said that they wanted them there to not just represent Development and Peace, but the church in Canada. So they were there officially as the in the name of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, which was quite historic. I think the bishops have never actually participated officially in a COP meeting. But what's interesting is Bishop Jan in particular is on fire after the experience coming back. And we recently just had our executive to executive meeting with the CCCB executive, and Bishop Jan spoke about the experience, and in particular is speaking about the need for the church in the north to do something to respond to this document, to take concrete actions, especially around the notions of North-South coalitions. So, you know, the very concrete thing about the observatory, that piqued my interest when you said that. So I was just curious to hear a bit more about it.
For sure. And that was quite of a, talking about chirological, that's a hard word to say, but chirological moment, because I happened to speak with Nicolas Mayer, who was at the conference, at the panel, and we happened to I don't know, organically come into this conversation about this ecclesial observatory for climate justice, and how could that become real, right? Of course, he acknowledges it's a big project because it not only entails the theological foundation that the church can bring in the coalition, the network aspect, but it also involves quite a bit of technical capacity that not necessarily would be within the church, right? So it would be necessary to reach out to universities and other networks working in the field of research. But the other question that he addressed was, we don't want to duplicate work and do, what is being done already. So there is other observatories in the issue of, I guess, climate justice. They're secular and also some related to some Catholic university in Catholic networks. But what we thought it would be is to create some sort of an brainstorming sessions where there can be some ideas presented, and that we could talk about it also with other Catholic networks that have been engaged in community research and engagement of environmental defenders within the communities. So back to the moment again, when we came back to Canada after COP30, I happened to have a conversation with one of the professors here at St. Paul University in Ottawa, here in Canada, who is very keen on starting a project on an observatory focused on the areas of the Amazon as a pilot project on creating visibility for environmental defenders that are risking their lives for the cause of defending the land. And that would include also religious who actually have also been in this cause. And the conversation happened here locally in Canada. And because of the connection with Nicolas from Caritas Latinoamérica, we say, why don't we get us all together in one call and invite other Catholic networks they might be interested in, but they're in Latin America, right? So we had 2 initial calls to discuss, and there was interest in the idea, but there was also the question about who will be the audience of this observatory, right? Do we want to have something that will produce reports for like international forums, or is this something that's going to go directly to the community, or is something that we can use here in Canada for advocacy? That's the exploratory piece right now. And we have another meeting booked for March. We actually invited Development and Peace as well for that brainstorming session. And we're hoping to continue that conversation in March. Professor Hernandez from St. Paul University is going to produce a bit of a proposal or what he's looking at, because his idea is to have an observatory that doesn't count, numbers of death. It's not about that. It's about grounding this in the territories and bringing it from the framework of integral ecology. So it's really like a forming idea, but there's a lot of spirit, I think, right now into building into something that is more concrete.
Great.
I want to
Great.
make
Thanks. I hope we accept the invitation.
Of course.
Oh, yes, you did.
let you-
2 of you.
Yeah.
I want to make 2 comments about this, if I may. There's not a question in the chat yet. But one is a takeaway for all of us to realize is that at the COP a year ago, Pope Francis released Laudate Deum, a statement from the Vatican about pushing the yardsticks forward. This year, the difference was that document that was up in the presentation from Jen and Saskia. The Global South bishops and cardinals speaking. That's a real step forward. And in that document, they called for an observatory. There are many observatories in the Vatican. This was an observatory on climate issues, but to be based in the Global South, in the Amazon. So I'm hoping Luke will announce next year that Development Peace is actually funding this as a follow-up to these programs. That'd be great. But the second thing for us to realize is most of the organizations here are part of the UISG. So the Ecclesial Network Alliance and so on, and these bishops have spoken, we need to have everybody in. Perhaps the next statement will not only be led by the Global South, but will be led by bishops and religious and lay people from the Global South. So we've moved forward, and we have more work to do to bring all of these sectors together. I just want to say that there was a question in French that was answered in the chat by Jen, but just a question around the petition that you shared, Jen. Do you want to explain in English so everybody knows?
Well, I'm actually yeah, I can, there's translation. I feel for the Francophones who are listening to so much English, but we do have the translators with us. Yes, so we continue to work in coalition that Turn Dead into Hope, which is Kairos, Development and Peace, Canadian Council of Churches, which includes a number of other churches, CPJ and us. So it's working together on moving this parliamentary petition forward, and in particular with members and religious congregations who are comfortable with meeting MPs. We didn't want to kind of do a call out to everybody everywhere to rush and try to make this happen. But we know that there's almost everybody on this call is very strong they know that the MPs. And so getting 30 signatures and asking the MPs to read this out in the House is something totally doable. And it will get it on the radar and talked about in the House of Commons. Because right now it's all about, I'm getting more and more upset as I listen to the news, but we're talking too much about ditching all our regulations, all our values just for this economy. So we're trying to bring the message of debt cancellation up front and center as we build up to a rally at the end of April in Ottawa. Alors, on est tout ensemble. Les groupes, il y a aussi en français, je pense qu'on l'a mis en anglais sur le site web, mais je vais le mettre les copies de la pétition parlementaire en français sur notre site web aussi.
I see, Jen. So Agnes, you put in several comments about the Laudato Si Action Program. Is there another question you have?
Not a question, but sort of slightly parallel to what ORCIE is doing with the parliamentary petition. There's the Lutheran Eastern Synod with a group centered in Montreal, but certainly Eastern Canada, are doing through Lent a calling campaign to MPs as well about eliminating subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. So that's happening in parallel to what you're doing with the parliamentary petition, and not as powerful because it's asking individuals who may or may not have experience in doing this kind of thing to talk to their MPs, whereas the parliamentary paper is read right in Parliament. But what I wanted to say is that there are others, faith groups, who are carrying the same message forward. And just to be aware of that, because I'm asking people in my next newsletter to support both your activities, the ORCIE and the Lutheran one. So hopefully there'll be things that people who are not as comfortable in one area can jump on the other one.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing. That'll be good. I want to just briefly respond. There's somebody else has a question. Raise your hand. We do have a couple of minutes left, but Diane Smythe has asked a question about tying in some of these issues with the synodal process. Allow me to say that some of you may know that I've been on the study group number 2, which Francis established for the Synod to look at the question of tying the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And our report has been submitted to the Secretariat for the Synod, and a couple of pages, it has to be under a 5-page synthesis report, has also been submitted to them. And apparently at least the Synod summary reports are going to be made public at some time. So hopefully the Synod, that helps tie the Synod process into next steps on ecological and social justice for the Church, the Catholic Church, through the Synod process. So there's also a couple of events being planned for ongoing conversations through the Synod. So maybe we can share some of those. Diane, there's a webinar coming up with certain people, and then I know Tara, who's on the call, is trying to engage with the Canadian bishop from Valleyfield, Bishop Alain Faubert, who is actually the North American rep on the Secretariat of the Synod, and he's very open and trying to get something happening at the level of the Bishops' Conference in Canada. So there may be some things that will happen there. We'll see. Was there another question? Anybody want to raise a question? Okay, not seeing any. Maybe I'll, oops.
Oh, sorry, Joe, I'm just copying that question that came through email from Noreen Aloseri Walsh.
Okay.
From
She's
Sisters
legit. We like Noreen.
Yeah, I think she just sent it through her email, so I'm not sure if she's with us. She probably, yeah.
Okay. So Jen or Saskia, do you want to answer the question that was put in the chat? How are the changing policies of the current government, the Carney government, I take it, going to impact the work ORCIE needs to focus on?
That is the big question. I think it's making it clearer how important we are, that our voices are needed more than ever, and how much harder we have to work right now. The current government is not making it easy for groups to reach ministers or even members of cabinet or parliamentary secretaries. There's a very top-down, closed-door approach, which is making our work harder. But it's also encouraging us to be creative and working more in coalition and more in strategizing so that we can make access. I think there's going to be a number of difficult fights ahead because because with C-15 in the House, like I said, everything is being put aside for the economy. Everything is being put aside because of the economy. And that's not acceptable. That's the total opposite of what we're calling for. We know that you can't separate the economy from social, political, and environmental issues. So for us is to bring that back and the messages to our elected leaders. So we count on you in your local MP meetings, and we serve as resources for how we can help there, while in parallel pushing in any way that we can in Ottawa.
Excellent. Si vous avez des questions en français, vous pouvez poser les questions dans le chat ou vous pouvez lever la main. But we'll go now to Karen, who has her hand up.
Thanks, Joe. I would just like to know a little bit about the advice that Jen was giving the Vatican.
I was like, why has nobody asked that question? This was what you remember. I had a slide where I was talking about the disconnect and the dissonance and how weird things were. Interestingly, the Vatican only joined the Paris Agreement 5 years ago. So in a lot of ways, the diplomatic crew that was participating in the COPs were playing a little bit of catch up. And they invited, because we were more organized this year and had a strong Catholic presence, lots of networks, they invited us to do these be in working groups. So along with a few others, I provided advice and pushing on the Just Transition program. But one of the weirdest moments that we had in COP, so everybody's walking around looking at their phone all the time because there's a WhatsApp group. I can't even keep track of all the channels we were using. Luke will remember this too.
Signal too,
it was
right?
on Signal, email, and then there's one group chat where I'm like with the Development of Peace people. There's another group chat with the Vatican, all the Catholic groups that kept on reminding us that when we went to church that it would count as our Sunday obligation. I was like, that's the important thing you're telling us? Okay. The environmental groups in Canada, the environmental groups internationally, and all of these messages were like crossing each other. And actually, at one point, this was like, it was a highlight. At one point, I'm seeing messages that the Vatican had allied itself with Iran and UAE to push back on any language about gender. And then the environmental groups saying, have you heard what the Vatican's doing? We need to make it public and shame them. And then this chat is saying, oh my God, they're finding out we're going to be shamed publicly. And this group is like, I was like, oh man. I was like, well, how did I end up on this intersection between these different groups? The point is, if ever the Vatican is aligning itself with Iran and United Arab Emirates, we should be asking questions. This is not the height of human rights protection. But the Vatican stood down and removed their problems with some language around gender and did step up in other areas. But it was a real example of the use of civil society to put pressure on different groups in their different negotiating streams.
Great. Thank you.
I
We've
don't
got
have
about,
any Vatican phone numbers now, but I do have a trace of.
well, Agnes has got her hand up, and since there's a picture of her with Pope Leo.
Actually, I was just clapping and congratulating Jen for you know, pointing out those dissonances with people who need to know what their messages are saying.
Yeah. So we know there's quite a difference between the delegation of the Holy See that officially goes and speaks in these conferences, and then all the groups that are trying to influence there. We'll do our best. I note that Luke has added to the chat, for those of you that are interested in some follow-up and the comments he made about the two bishops that went to the COP as part of the Development and Peace delegation. There was a really quite a very, very good webinar that the Development Peace hosted when the delegation returned. And those of you that are interested in looking at that sometime as a follow-up can see that's a very good thing. And I think it's probably interesting for people to know that we actually, in planning this webinar, ORCIE reached out to see if there was a possibility of having one of the bishops participate, and it just wasn't because of timing. So we really do hope that we continue to work together with Development and Peace and support the work of religious congregations and Development and Peace going forward, because we're very natural allies.
Luke, I hope you don't mind if I borrow some of the photos from your COP30 website. Great, thanks.
Any other questions? If not, we'll turn it back over to Jen and Saskia.
Merci beaucoup. Juste un dernier mot de remerciement à nos interprètes qui nous avons aidés énormément aujourd'hui, et un bravo à Saskia qui a présenté la majorité de l'info aujourd'hui et partagé ses histoires personnelles. Just saying a special thank you to our interpreters who helped us today, for all of you being here, and for Saskia, who presented a great deal of the content and her personal experience today. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.